Today I want to answer the question, what can I do for a child that doesn't read? It's amazing how much confusion, how many myths there are around this particular subject. So in this talk I'm going to give you various tests, including a 2-minute test that will point you to the real root cause, and it'll probably surprise you, and I'm hoping and expecting you to have a few aha moments, and you'll probably even get to the attitude, why has nobody told me this before? So I got involved because of my daughter. I've got 4 children. My oldest daughter struggled with reading, had great teachers, she worked hard, but couldn't read. She left school at 16, not being able to read easily any 3 or 4 letter words even. And we obviously got all the best advice we could, and she was told various things like she's got to learn to live with it, she's got to have more phonics, and so on. Well, finally, she got very, very depressed, and she attempted to take her life. I was 2 hours away from the hospital, and on that journey to the hospital, as you can imagine, I went through all of the guilt and agony. Did I do everything I could? Did I try this? Did I try that? And before I got to the hospital, I made the decision that I was going to change my life. I was an entrepreneur and doing research into all sorts of things and making all sorts of wonderful breakthroughs. I now needed to change my life and focus on why was it that Susie could not read? Why would a seemingly bright girl struggle with things that are easy for most people, but for her was impossible, and it had made her increasingly depressed? Well, mercifully I got to the hospital and I was given the message, she's pulling through. And that was a huge relief. But I'd made my mind up. I was changing my life. So over the coming years, I sold my businesses and put all of my time and effort and energy into finding out why some people don't develop skills. That took me on a journey to meet incredible professors, piecing together research that still isn't reaching. 20 years on, still is not reaching the families that desperately need it. So let me start and give you very quickly 8 questions. And if you tick 3 or more of these, the probability is it's absolutely not phonics, and you can do something about it. So, question number 1. Does your child, or you, or your partner even, jump words or lines ever? Tick that, yes or no. Second question. Do they ever read words backwards or write letters backwards? Yes or no? Do they ever use a finger or a ruler to try and track the line to help them read? Yes or no? Did they bypass crawling? This is question 4. Did they bypass crawling? So in other words, they went from shuffling on their bottom to walking around the furniture, hanging onto the chairs, and so on. So they bypass most of the crawling stage. Question 5. Do they ever go into emotional overload? In other words, they get frustrated or uptight really more easily than you'd expect them to. Question number 6. Do they have good ideas but simply cannot write them down? Question 7. Do they hold their pen in a strange way? Now, the correct way is with your fingertips, and you write with your fingertips. Some people have to write holding their hand in a strange way, and there's all sorts of different ways, but effectively they're writing with their whole hand. That's a gross motor skill. That's a fine motor skill, just to be a bit technical. And the 8th question, final question, is, do they find spelling really hard to learn and retain? So there's 8 questions. And if you said yes to 3 or more of those, then the probability is that they have something very different to a need for more phonics. They have got a skill, an eye movement skill that hasn't yet fully developed. Yes, and it does affect 1 in 4 people, and yes, you can do something about it. But if they have that issue, the fact is they don't read for pleasure. Sometimes they can read, but it's very, very hard for them. So they'll read what they have to, but they won't ever pick up a book and read it just to enjoy, because it's such hard work. And as so many families have talked about since their children have been trying to study at home, children that have these issues simply cannot study. It's such a struggle. It is so painful. And if they've got that issue now, then they'll probably go right through life with it unless you do something about it. You know, a friend of mine who's just passed was a very famous household name in sport. in show jumping in this country, and yet every time he went to a restaurant, he had to ask somebody to help him read the menu. If he didn't know them, he'd make an excuse about not having his glasses or something. And that, of course, affected every part of his life. His wife dealt with all of their correspondence and so on. It's a big issue. And an old lady came to me once in her 80s saying that she couldn't do what everyone else found easy, and it broke my heart. Well, we were able to help her, and that's a whole nother story. But have you noticed entrepreneurs often don't read much? Do you know one? Do you know of an entrepreneur that's doing really well in business but hardly ever reads? There's quite a high proportion of them are just like that, even billionaires. So this whole subject of ability to read is totally misunderstood. I'll never forget an expert telling my daughter she's got to learn to live with it. Well, it wasn't long afterwards she attempted to take her life, and she was telling the world it isn't worth living with in her case. So as a parent, we cannot take the risk. And of course, most of us will have gone through the process of diagnosis. And in the United States, for many that struggle with reading, the diagnosis is ADD or even ADHD. In Britain, it's more commonly dyslexia. But one of the biggest issues is the same. It's they don't find reading easy. So what's gone wrong? In nearly every case, it's the ability to move their eyes smoothly has never developed. And that's a skill. Nothing to do with intelligence. Completely divorced from level of intelligence. In fact, it often seems that the higher the level of intelligence, the more likely it is that they're going to have some eye tracking or eye movement issue. So why try and force more phonics on them? Isn't that cruel to teachers? Of the 50,000 I've worked with, I didn't find anybody that hadn't got enough phonics teaching. Teachers are brilliant at teaching phonics. That doesn't overcome a lack of ability to move their eyes smoothly. So their eyes literally jump around. So the letters and words go in a scrambled order. Doesn't matter how intelligent you are, your brain isn't going to unscramble that very easily. So let's stop looking to phonics as being the first port of call. Scientifically, it's not supportable. In the last 30 years that phonics has been hugely popular, it hasn't done anything for children. It hasn't created lasting results. But if you can unscramble why their eye tracking is poor, why that skill hasn't developed, well, that's a whole different story. So please don't blame teachers if your child is struggling with reading. And please don't blame yourself. You haven't been a bad parent either. And don't blame the child. Some think that the child is being lazy and tries to force them to do more reading, or even worse, reading out loud. No, that doesn't solve the problem. Tinted lenses doesn't solve the problem, because that's not the root cause. It might help some a bit, but it isn't solving the root cause. You know, we want our kids to read. We want them to go through life having every possible benefit that we can. And, you know, if your child has been given a reading test, the teachers might have come back to you and said, oh, he or she does all right on reading tests, they score such and such, but they still don't read for pleasure. What's going on? Well, ask what that reading test was. Because one word reading test, in other words, they have to focus on reading one word, doesn't check whether their eye tracking skills have developed, because they can focus on one word and some of them can read what that is. So their reading age from a one-word reading test might be coming out okay. But they still don't pick up a book and read for pleasure. What's that all about? The only reading test that tells you truly your child's ability to read is a comprehension test, where they have to read lots of words, and you're checking their eye tracking and their ability to turn what they see into words that they comprehend. So often children with a good one-word reading test will have a poor comprehension test. Of course, most people want those test results to be as good as they can be, so they often go for the one-word reading test, but I'm afraid that doesn't reflect what's happening in their real life. So don't let anyone confuse you with that. So let's get to the root cause. So I'm talking about eye movement skills. They haven't developed. So it's not low intelligence, it's not poor teaching, it's not laziness, it's not poor parenting. It's a skill. And when that skill hasn't developed, they have to work very, very hard, thinking about what they're seeing, trying to turn those scrambled letters and words into something that makes sense. That is incredibly difficult. And what happens? Children like that are often written off. So no one expects any more of them. They end up with a fixed mindset. Oh, you're not very good at school. They stop learning and people stop expecting. That's the worst thing that can happen. Often parents, of course, have a sixth sense. They sense that the child has got some intelligence that isn't being discovered. And I had that with Susie. And she's shown it in a myriad ways since. So parents will probably be asking, well, what can I do about it? Well, first thing, there is something you can do, but the first thing you can do is make sure that they have got this issue that I'm talking about, that is poor eye tracking. And there's various healthcare providers, chiropractors and naturopaths and some psychiatrists who are installing eye tracking testing equipment in their clinics, because 1 in 4 of the families that are their patients have this issue. So it's a very, very common issue. And you're bound to ask, why doesn't the education system do something about this? Why isn't every school testing appropriately to find out if it's eye tracking skills that haven't developed that's causing this problem? Instead of that, the education system puts so much effort into diagnosing, giving more phonics, knocking the creativity out of them. So wherever you live in the world, send me a message and I'll dig out, or my assistant will dig out, where the nearest healthcare provider is that's got this testing equipment, and you can take them there. It only takes 12 minutes and you'll see videos of exactly what's happening to your child's eyes. And that's when you get an aha moment. You realize this is a skill that hasn't developed. This is not low intelligence. And when you can do something about a skill, of course, you want to. Mums often ask, did I do something wrong during pregnancy or after my child was born? No, you didn't. Is it genetic? Possibly. Is it the environment? Possibly. I let the academics worry about that. What you want is a solution. What you want to know is, how can I transform my child's eye tracking skills so that they can read more easily? And you can do it at any age. That 82-year-old lady I was telling you about earlier, just 4 months after she asked me that question, she was on British national television reading and writing for the first time in her life. 2 years later, I heard from her daughter saying she's reading in 3 languages now. So why isn't this in every school? Why is it that the education system is so slow to adopt new ideas? Well, look at what's happening with PCs. At the moment in Britain, there's a huge hoo-ha about getting tablets or PCs for every child so that when they're having to learn at home, they can learn. In every office 30 years ago, everybody had a PC, a computer to work with. Why has it taken us 30 years before we do the obvious thing and give every child a PC, a computer? I don't know, it beats me. But if that is the case, if that's how slow the education system is to adapt new technology and new ideas, then don't expect anything to happen in the next 30 years about what I'm sharing with you. If you're a warrior parent, you've got to take on this issue for yourself. So please take it seriously. What happened to my daughter was a mental health issue that is very, very common with children and adults that struggle with reading and learning and concentration. When you have any form of learning limitation, the likelihood of a mental health issue coming up is very, very high. So don't take a risk. Take it seriously. Send me a message and I'll tell you where the nearest healthcare provider is. And if there isn't one close to you, I can give you access to some other tests and assessments that will tell you once and for all, without any ambiguity, the root cause of the issue that's holding you or your child back. So I wish you well. Thanks for listening. Speak again soon.